I installed the cameras to catch my wife having an affair. What I discovered was a medical secret she'd been hiding for 15 years, broadcast in night vision green every single night. My name is Daniel, and for 6 months I watched my marriage unravel. My wife, Claire, would vanish from our bed after midnight, returning with no memory. I was convinced it was guilt, so I broke the law to prove it. What I captured on those cameras wasn't another man. It was a meticulously orchestrated, unconscious performance, night after night. And the truth was far more dangerous than any affair. It began with crumbs, literally. Waking up to find the kitchen a mess, butter smeared on the counter, a loaf of bread ravaged. And Claire, sound asleep beside me, would swear she never left the bed. At first it was a joke, sleepwalking snacks. We'd been married for 8 years and she'd always been a deep sleeper. But the incidents grew more elaborate. A full pot of inedible, salty pasta left boiling on a cold stove. All the canned goods from the pantry arranged in a perfect spiral on the living room floor. I'd find her standing in the hallway, eyes wide open but vacant, whispering about a list I couldn't see. Then came the weight gain. Unexplained, rapid. Claire was a disciplined person, a marathon runner. She blamed stress, her new medication, perimenopause, but she was horrified. I was confused, and the nighttime noises became impossible to ignore. The creak of the floorboards had a specific rhythm, 2:15 a.m. every night, like clockwork. The suspicion didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It seeped in cold and slow. Her phone always face down, new passcodes. Working late with a colleague named Mark whose name came up too often in her tired apologies. The classic signs. I felt like a cliché, ticking boxes on a list of betrayal. The sleepwalking, the secrecy, the distance. It all pointed to a guilt so profound it was fracturing her mind at night. I bought the cameras online. 4 of them, small, black, with wide-angle lenses and night vision. They were advertised for home security, for watching pets. The legal disclaimer was a single line: user is responsible for complying with all local privacy laws. I knew what I was doing was illegal. In our state, recording someone without their consent in a private residence is a criminal misdemeanor. It's also a surefire way to lose everything in a divorce. But I needed to know. I needed proof to shatter the gaslighting, to confirm the affair I was certain was happening. The installation was the most deceitful hour of my life. I did it on a Tuesday while Claire was at her sister. One camera went inside the smoke detector in the kitchen, another in a digital clock on the living room bookshelf, a third in the hallway air vent. The fourth, the most invasive, I placed on the headboard frame of our own bed, its lens peering out from behind a framed photo of us at our wedding. My hands shook the entire time. This was the point of no return. For the first week, nothing. Just hours of empty, green-tinted rooms. I'd watch the live feed on my phone at work, my stomach in knots. I felt like a monster. And then on the 8th night, the motion sensor alert chimed on my phone at 2:07 a.m. I was in my home office, pretending to work. The kitchen camera triggered. Claire walked into frame. But she didn't look like Claire. Her movements were fluid, yet utterly mechanical. Her face was slack, her eyes open but unseeing, glazed over in the infrared glow. This wasn't the furtive, guilty look of someone sneaking a call. This was something else. She opened the refrigerator and stood there perfectly still for a full 3 minutes. Then she pulled out a block of cheddar cheese, a jar of pickles, and a tub of frosting. She placed them on the island with ceremonial care. She didn't eat them. She began constructing something. Using her fingers, she smeared frosting and pickle juice on the cheese block, then carefully placed it back in the fridge. She wiped her hands clean on a dish towel, closed the refrigerator door, and walked silently back to bed. The whole episode lasted less than 7 minutes. I sat in the dark, my heart pounding for a completely different reason now. This wasn't infidelity. This was pathology. The next night, it was the pantry. She took every box of cereal, opened them, and poured them into a single, giant mixing bowl, creating a mountain of multicolored flakes. She then placed the bowl in the oven. She never turned it on. She just shut the oven door and left. Night after night, a new bizarre, nonsensical ritual, rearranging furniture, filling the bathtub with towels, folding laundry by taking all the clothes and stuffing them into the dishwasher. I compiled the clips, a growing library of the absurd. The affair theory was dead. This was a medical mystery and a terrifying one. I started researching. The term parasomnia kept appearing, sleepwalking, sleep-related eating disorder, but the descriptions didn't fully match. This was too complex, too repetitive, too ritualistic. The turning point came 2 weeks in. The bedroom camera caught it. Claire sat bolt upright in bed at 2 a.m. She turned her head slowly and looked directly at the camera hidden behind our wedding photo. Her eyes were still empty, but her mouth moved. I turned the volume up all the way. Her voice was a dry, hollow whisper completely unlike her own. It said 3 words clear as day. He is watching. A chill, primal and deep, shot through me. She was asleep. Medical journals said that was impossible. Sleepwalkers don't have complex conversations. They don't acknowledge unseen observers. Was there a sliver of consciousness in there, or was it something else? The next day I tested her. Over coffee, I casually asked, "You ever feel like someone watching us sleep?" She laughed, a genuine, bright sound. "Only you creep," she said, kissing my forehead. No flicker of recognition. No guilt. Just my wife. The duality was breaking me. The loving, confused woman by day and this nocturnal, unconscious architect by night. I had to tell her. I had to show her the videos. But how do you tell someone you've illegally recorded them for weeks? That their mind is doing things science says it should. The legal risk was catastrophic. She could have me arrested. She would certainly leave me. I decided to seek an answer first. A name for what this was. I needed leverage before the confession. I found an online forum for sleep disorder spouses, a secret, desperate corner of the internet. I created a fake profile and described the rituals, the vacant eyes, the whispered words. The responses were immediate, and they changed everything. 3 users sent me private messages. Their stories were identical. The complex food preparations, the object arranging, the specific 2 a.m. timing. And all of them, every single one, said their spouses had been diagnosed with a specific, rare neurological condition. A condition triggered not by genetics but by a traumatic brain injury. A fall. A car accident. Something the brain had buried. Claire was in a car accident 16 years ago. She totaled her first car, a minor concussion, or so we thought. She never mentioned it again. I never asked. As I read the medical abstracts these strangers sent me, the pieces slammed together with terrifying force. This wasn't just sleepwalking. This was a locked door in her mind, swinging open every night. And behind that door wasn't another man. It was a version of my wife, trapped in the moment of impact, replaying a survival ritual her damaged brain had invented. The food was fuel for a journey. The objects were barriers against a threat. The whisper was a warning to her past self. I had the answer, and it was worse than any affair. I sat there staring at the forum post confirming the diagnosis. I had the proof, not of betrayal, but of a hidden trauma that had been puppeteering our lives. I had to tell her. I opened the folder containing the most damning video, the one where she looks at the camera. This was the clip that would make her see. This was the clip that would either make her understand why I spied or destroy us forever. I hit play one last time and my blood ran cold. The video was different. In the corner of the frame, in the shadowed doorway of our bedroom, was a new figure. A man standing perfectly still, watching Claire sleep. It was Mark, her colleague, and he wasn't there by accident. He was holding a small, familiar black device. It was the receiver for my cameras. He knew I was watching. He had known the whole time. He was in my house, in the dead of night, watching my sleeping wife, holding the key to my own crime. In that moment, the medical mystery vanished. This was a hunt. I froze, the phone slick in my hand. On screen, Mark didn't move. He just watched Claire, his expression unreadable in the grainy green light. Then he looked up, not at Claire, directly at the camera in the headboard. A slow, deliberate smile touched his lips. He raised the black receiver in a mock toast, then turned and melted back into the hallway shadows. The feed went still. My own surveillance had been surveilled. Every night of footage, every private, vulnerable moment of Claire's disorder was compromised. By him. Panic was a live wire in my chest. I had minutes, maybe seconds before he used this. I didn't think, I acted. I slammed my laptop shut, ran to the bedroom, and ripped the camera from behind our wedding photo. I tore the house apart, finding the others, the smoke detector, the clock, the air vent. I threw them all into a duffel bag. I was erasing a crime scene, but I knew it was futile. The footage was in the cloud. He had the receiver. He had the evidence of my felony. I sat on the floor of the ransacked living room at 4 a.m., the bag of cameras beside me like a corpse. The legal reality was absolute. In our state, unauthorized electronic surveillance is a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in jail. But that was just the state. Claire could sue me civilly for invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress. She would own everything. The house, our savings, my future. Mark hadn't just outsmarted me. He had handed me a loaded gun and pointed it at my own head. But why? If he wanted to destroy me, a simple, anonymous tip to the police would do it. He didn't need to skulk in my hallway, unless his goal wasn't just to expose me, unless his goal was Claire. I spent the dawn hours in a digital frenzy. I had to know my enemy, Mark Evans, Claire's colleague at the architectural firm. I'd met him once at a Christmas party, polite, unassuming, forgettable. My search began there, but quickly tunneled into a darkness I wasn't prepared for. His LinkedIn was professional, sparse, but a deeper dive into county court records revealed a pattern. 2 restraining orders from previous relationships, both dismissed due to lack of evidence. A civil suit from a former business partner alleging coercive control and financial manipulation, settled out of court. Then I found the medical license, not for Mark Evans, for a Dr. Marcus Evans, whose license to practice psychiatry had been suspended 5 years ago in a neighboring state following allegations of gross ethical violations involving a patient with a dissociative disorder. The file was sealed, but the public docket headline screamed, "Licensee accused of exploiting patients' parasomnia for personal gain." The room tilted. Parasomnia, exploitation. The pieces, jagged and horrifying, began to click into a new, monstrous picture. Claire's rare neurological sleep disorder, her old, buried trauma from the car accident, Mark, or Marcus, the former psychiatrist with a history of targeting such conditions. This wasn't an affair. This was something infinitely more calculated. He wasn't stealing my wife's affection. He was weaponizing her unconscious mind. I had to see the footage from that night again. The cloud backup was still active. I pulled up the hallway camera view, the timestamp of Mark's appearance. I watched, now with a forensic eye. He didn't just watch, he performed. He entered the frame holding a small metallic object, a pendulum. He let it swing slowly before Claire's closed bedroom door. Then he spoke, his voice a low murmur the microphone barely caught. I enhanced the audio, filtering out the static. His words were a script. "The door is safe, the fuel is stored, the watcher is gone." He repeated the phrase 3 times. Then and only then did Claire's bedroom door open. She emerged, sleepwalking. She didn't acknowledge him. She moved past him toward the kitchen, beginning her ritual. Mark didn't follow her. He stood in the hallway, watching her go, a sculptor observing his automaton. He had triggered the episode. He was directing the sleepwalking. The realization was a physical blow. Her nightly rituals weren't just a random neurological misfire. They were a programmed response. He had somehow linked his presence, his voice, his actions to the traumatic circuitry in her brain. He was inside her head, a ghost in the machine of her sleep. The "he is watching" whisper wasn't a warning to her past self. It was a status report for him. My mission shattered and reformed in an instant. This was no longer about saving my marriage from a secret illness. This was about extracting Claire from a predator's grip, and I had to do it while he held the power to send me to prison. I was in a box of my own making. I needed to understand the method. I went back to the sleep disorder forum, but now with a new, desperate question. I posed as a researcher, asking if anyone had heard of sleepwalking being externally triggered by a specific person or sound. The responses were cautious, but one user, a neurologist from Canada, sent me a private, lengthy message. He described a documented but exceedingly rare phenomenon called parasomnia provocation. In vulnerable brains with a history of trauma, a specific conditioned stimulus, a smell, a sound, a phrase could act as a key, unlocking the sleepwalking state. It was a form of non-conscious Pavlovian conditioning. It's ethically monstrous, he wrote, but theoretically, if someone discovered the right key, they could induce these states at will. You're describing a level of control that borders on psychological torture. Mark had found the key. The car accident 16 years ago, he knew about it. Claire must have told him in what she thought was a confidential conversation with a sympathetic colleague. He had taken that trauma and woven himself into it, becoming a character in her unconscious nightmare. The watcher, the controller. I had to get proof he was doing this intentionally. The video of him with the pendulum was creepy but circumstantial. I needed his motive. I needed to see the strings. That meant I had to go back into the darkness. I had to rearm the cameras. It was the most dangerous decision I'd ever made. If Mark detected new surveillance, he'd act immediately. I couldn't use Wi-Fi cameras. He'd be monitoring the network. I bought battery-powered local storage cameras from a spy shop across town. They recorded to a memory card, no signals, no cloud. I installed them the next day, more hidden than before. Inside a bookshelf speaker, behind a ceiling light fixture, one disguised as a power brick in an outlet near the front door. I was building a trap with myself as the bait. For 3 nights, nothing. Claire's rituals continued, but Mark didn't appear. The silence was worse. I was jumping at every noise, checking the feeds obsessively. I was becoming a ghost in my own home, haunted by the man I was trying to catch. On the 4th night, the trap sprung. The front door camera alerted me, not at 2 a.m. but at 11 p.m. while Claire and I were watching TV. I saw the doorknob turn, slowly testing. It was locked. A shadow moved away. He was casing the house while we were awake. The audacity was a cold slap. This wasn't just about the sleepwalking. He was establishing total environmental control. An hour later, Claire fell asleep on the couch. I carried her to bed, my heart a drum against my ribs. I pretended to sleep, my phone under the pillow, screen dimmed to the hallway feed. 2:05 a.m., the front door camera showed a figure approaching. Not testing the knob this time. He used a key to my house. Mark slipped inside, moving with practiced silence. He went straight to the hallway outside our bedroom. He didn't use the pendulum this time. From his pocket, he withdrew a small vial. He uncapped it and wafted it under his nose, then carefully held it near the gap under our door. A scent trigger. Olfactory cues are the strongest mnemonic devices, directly wired to the amygdala, the brain's trauma center. He was using a smell associated with the accident. Gasoline. Burning rubber. I couldn't tell. Within 60 seconds, the bedroom door opened. Claire walked out, her vacant eyes fixed on nothing. Mark stepped back, observing. He whispered, "Inventory." Claire turned and walked to the kitchen. She opened the freezer and began removing frozen vegetables, lining them up on the floor in rows. "Assessment," he whispered. She stopped, tilted her head, then began putting them back in reverse order. I was recording all of it. This was the proof. Premeditated scientific manipulation. But as I watched, a new, more terrifying detail emerged. Mark wasn't just watching. He was taking notes on a small tablet. He was documenting her responses, tweaking his stimuli. This was an ongoing experiment, and his end goal was written on his face, a look of rapt, possessive fascination. He wasn't just trying to control her sleep. He was methodically erasing the boundary between her unconscious and conscious will. How long until he could give a command she'd obey while awake? I had my evidence, but evidence of what? A crime so novel no law book had a name for it. Psychological battery, unlawful imprisonment of the mind. A district attorney would laugh me out of the office, especially once Mark revealed my own illegal recordings. I was in a standoff with a snake, and we were both holding poison. The next morning, I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the source. I waited until Claire left for work, then I called Mark's direct line at the firm. When he answered, his voice was calm, pleasant. "Mark Evans." "It's Daniel, Claire's husband." The line went so quiet I could hear the hum of his office lights. "Daniel, this is a surprise. No fear, just cool assessment. We need to talk, tonight, away from the house." "I'm not sure that's appropriate," he said, the model of professional concern. "I have video," I said, my voice flat, "of you in my home, of you using scent and verbal cues on my wife while she is in a medically vulnerable state. I have your medical license suspension records, Marcus." The silence this time was different, thick and dangerous. When he spoke again, the pleasant mask was gone. His voice was lower, smoother, like oil over glass. "I see. You've been busy and criminal. Those recordings of yours, they're quite the liability, Daniel. Meet me at the Old River Dock on Mill Road. 9 p.m. Come alone. Or I release everything I have to the state medical board and every news outlet I can find. You might beat the law, but you'll never practice anything again." I hung up. My hands were trembling. I had just thrown a grenade into the center of the maze. I had no idea where the shrapnel would land, but I knew one thing for certain. The quiet war was over. The confrontation had begun, and one of us wasn't walking away from that dock. The river dock was a skeleton of rotting wood in the dark. He was already there, a silhouette against the black water, and he wasn't alone. Claire stood beside him. Her posture was rigid, her eyes wide and alert, but there was a strange flatness to her expression. She was awake. This was my first gut-churning realization. She was awake and she was with him. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder, a possessive gesture that made my vision swim. "Daniel," Claire said. Her voice was hers, but the cadence was off, monotone. "We need to talk about your paranoia." I stopped 10 feet away. "Claire, step away from him right now." "She's exactly where she wants to be," Mark said. His smile was a knife in the moonlight. "You brought the evidence, I assume, the illegal recordings." "I brought copies. The originals are with my lawyer. If I don't check in by midnight, they go to the medical board and the police. Your move, doctor." He chuckled, a dry, soundless thing. "My move was made 6 months ago, Daniel. The moment your wife came to me, distressed about her sleep, about your growing suspicion. She was afraid of you. I offered her a safe space to talk, and in doing so, I discovered the profound trauma her mind had buried. The car accident wasn't minor. She was pinned for an hour, smelling gasoline, listening to a passerby repeat, 'It's okay, help is watching.' That phrase, that smell, it wired her survival instinct to a state of hypervigilant obedience. A fascinating, if tragic, psychological adaptation. He was narrating her trauma like a case study, right in front of her, and Claire just stood there listening. "You didn't discover it," I spat. "You exploited it, you conditioned her. You're triggering these episodes." "I'm treating her," he corrected, his voice smooth. "The sleepwalking is a release valve for repressed terror. By guiding the episodes in a controlled, safe environment, I'm helping her brain reprocess the trauma. It's called exposure therapy, facilitated during the parasomniac state. Unconventional but groundbreaking." "Bullshit, you're doing it in secret in my home, with a key you shouldn't have." Claire spoke then, her eyes locking onto mine. "I gave him the key, Daniel. I asked him to help me. You were so angry all the time, so suspicious. I was scared to tell you how bad it had gotten, how broken I felt." Her words were a physical blow. They sounded true. They sounded like her. But they landed with the precision of a scalpel aimed directly at my guilt. This was his masterstroke. He hadn't just programmed her sleep. He'd crafted a waking narrative, a story where he was the hero and I was the villain, a story she believed. "He's manipulating you, Claire, while you sleep. He's using smells, phrases, he's inside your head." "I know what he's doing," she said, and a flicker of the old Claire, fierce and intelligent, shone through. We're mapping the triggers together to neutralize them. It's my treatment. You spying on me, that's the violation, that's the sickness. Mark's hand tightened on her shoulder. A signal. Her expression smoothed back into that unsettling placidity. He had levels of control I couldn't even fathom. Here's the reality, Daniel, Mark said. You have evidence of me, a licensed therapist, conducting late-night therapy sessions with a consenting client in her own home. Unorthodox, yes. Illegal, no. She has signed consent forms dated months ago. You, however, have committed multiple felonies. The moment you release your so-called evidence, you will be arrested. Claire will testify against you. She'll detail your controlling behavior, your jealousy, your illegal surveillance. You will go to jail. And I will be her sole source of support during that traumatic time. The box I was in had just shrunk to the size of a coffin. He had thought of everything. He had legal consent. He had turned my wife into a witness for the prosecution. My evidence was now evidence of my own crime. What do you want? The words tasted like ash. Simplicity, he said. You will sign a post-nuptial agreement prepared by my lawyer, granting Claire 70% of all marital assets in the house. You will cite irreconcilable differences and your own mental instability. You will move out. You will then check yourself into a voluntary psychiatric hold for observation, a 30-day program I have already arranged. This demonstrates to any future court your acknowledged instability and provides a clean, clinical reason for the divorce. He was narrating my erasure, and if I refuse, then we proceed with the criminal complaint tomorrow. Claire is prepared to file a restraining order. The narrative is already written. The troubled, paranoid husband escalating to dangerous surveillance. The compassionate therapist helping the victim rebuild her life. The press will love it. You'll lose everything, including your freedom. I looked at Claire. Claire, please look at me. This is not you. He's done something to you. For a fraction of a second I saw it, a war behind her eyes, a flicker of terror, of confusion. Then it was gone, submerged under that calm surface. This is for the best, Daniel, she whispered. You need help. That flicker was my only weapon. She was still in there. He hadn't completely overwritten her. But to reach her, I had to play a game far more dangerous than his. I had to agree to my own destruction. I need to see the consent forms, I said, my shoulders slumping in defeat. Of course, Mark smiled. He pulled a tablet from his briefcase, swiped, and held it up. There was a digital signature that looked like Claire's, dated 3 months prior, the day after she first mentioned working late with Mark. I'll need my own lawyer to look at that. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow. The documents will be emailed to you. Sign them, Daniel. It's the only way to avoid prison and get the help you need. He turned, guiding Claire back toward a waiting car. She didn't look back. I stood on the rotting dock, the river sucking at the pilings below. I had lost, utterly. But as I drove home, a cold, analytical fury took over. The flicker in Claire's eyes, that was the flaw in his perfect plan. His control wasn't absolute. He needed her compliance, her belief in the narrative. What if that belief cracked? I couldn't fight him legally. He'd outmaneuvered me. I couldn't fight him physically. He'd used that as proof of my instability. I had to fight him on the only battlefield he couldn't fully control, Claire's own subconscious. I had to use his own method against him. I had to plant a counter idea in her mind, a seed that would grow and break his programming from the inside. It was an insane, desperate plan. It required me to become a ghost in my own home, to use the very cameras that condemned me as a surgical tool. I couldn't trigger her sleepwalking. I didn't know the precise cues, but I could introduce a new element into the ritual environment, a persistent, gentle, contradictory signal. That night, after pretending to pack a suitcase, I went to the garage. I had one camera left, the one from the headboard. I modified it. I disconnected the microphone and, using a tutorial I found on a voice actors forum, I programmed it to play a single looped audio file. A file of my own voice, processed to be soft, distant, and melodic. Not a command, a reminder. I waited until 3 a.m. when the house was silent. I snuck the modified camera into the air vent in the hallway, the one that carried sound directly into our bedroom. I set it to activate via motion sensor between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m. only. It would play the 5-second loop, then stop, a whisper in the machine. The next day, the email arrived. The post-nuptial agreement was even more brutal than described. I forwarded it to a lawyer I'd retained secretly weeks ago, an old friend who practiced family law in another state. His reply was one line: "Do not sign this. This is predatory. We fight." But fighting meant exposure. It meant Mark would trigger the criminal case. I was trapped. I played for time. I emailed Mark back. "My lawyer is reviewing, needs 72 hours. His reply was instant. "You have 24. The clock is ticking, Daniel." The pressure was a vice. But that night my ghost in the machine spoke for the first time. I watched from a hidden laptop in the garage as the motion sensor triggered. Claire walked into the hallway for her ritual. As she passed the vent, the audio played. My processed voice, a gentle whisper: "You are safe here." She didn't stop. She didn't react. She continued to the kitchen, but I watched the feed, my heart in my throat. The next night the same: "You are safe here." On the third night, something changed. She paused mid-stride just for a second, her head tilting slightly. It was less than a heartbeat, but it was a reaction. The seed had found soil. Meanwhile, I had to act like a defeated man. I packed boxes. I spoke to Claire only in short, resigned sentences. I let her see the despair on my face. It wasn't hard to fake. Mark visited openly now, sitting with her in the living room, discussing treatment plans. His victory was complete. But I was digging. With my friend the lawyer, we focused on one thing: the consent form, its date, 3 months ago. We subpoenaed Claire's phone records for that day, and we found it. At 2 p.m., the time stamp on the digital signature, Claire's phone was actively used for a 45-minute GPS-navigated drive across town. She was in her car, driving to a client meeting. She couldn't have been sitting with Mark, signing a detailed consent form on his tablet. The signature was a forgery. Or worse, it was obtained under duress, while she was in a susceptible state. It was our first crack, a hairline fracture in his legal armor, but we needed more. We needed to prove the duress. We needed to prove she was not in her right mind when she aligned with him. That proof came from an unexpected source: the Sleep Disorder Forum. The neurologist from Canada, after hearing my full story, sent me a medical research paper. It detailed a case where a patient with a similar trauma-induced parasomnia had been manipulated by a partner using conditioned triggers. The paper had a key finding. During the manipulated episodes, the patient's brainwaves showed a unique, aberrant pattern, a signature of external induction. It was distinguishable from spontaneous sleepwalking. If I could get a recording of Claire's brain activity during one of Mark's triggered episodes, we could prove it wasn't therapy. It was coercion. Getting an EEG on my wife in secret was impossible, but I realized I didn't need the full medical-grade data. I just needed to prove the trigger, and I had a new, devastating idea. If Mark's control relied on specific cues, the smell, the phrase, what would happen if I presented the cue but attached it to a new, threatening outcome for him? I had to risk everything. I had 24 hours before Mark's deadline. I wrote an email to my lawyer friend. "File the motion to invalidate the consent form based on the phone records. Do it at 8:59 a.m. tomorrow." Then, I prepared my final piece of theater. That evening, I told Claire I was signing the papers in the morning, that I was checking into the facility. I apologized for everything. I was hollow, broken. She looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw genuine pity in her eyes. Not the programmed calm, but real human sorrow. The seed was growing. I waited until 1 a.m. I took the small vial I had found in Mark's briefcase during his last visit, a vial of synthetic gasoline odor I had swapped for water. I also took a portable speaker connected to my phone. I entered the hallway. This was the gamble. If I was wrong about the cues, nothing would happen. If I was right, I might break his hold, or I might send Claire into a psychological tailspin. I placed the speaker by the vent. I uncapped the vial. I pressed play on my phone. Through the speaker, I played a recording of Mark's voice saying his trigger phrase, "The Watcher is gone." Then, immediately after, I played my new implanted audio, "The Watcher is a liar. He will be taken." I wafted the scent into the air. The bedroom door opened. Claire emerged, but she wasn't walking to the kitchen. She stood still, her head twitching as if two conflicting programs were crashing. She looked at me. Her eyes were vacant, but her mouth moved. "Who will be taken?" she whispered in that hollow sleep voice. "The liar," I whispered back, my voice trembling. "The false watcher, he hurts you." A single tear rolled down her sleeping cheek. "Hurts," she repeated. Then her body went rigid. She turned, not toward the kitchen, but toward the front door. She walked to it, unlocked it, and stepped out into the cold night barefoot. I followed, my heart hammering. She walked to Mark's car, parked discreetly down the street. She placed her hand on the driver's side window. "Taken," she said clearly. Then she turned, walked back inside, and went straight to bed. I stood on the sidewalk, the freezing air biting my skin. I had done it. I had hacked his program. I had introduced a virus. Claire's subconscious now associated his trigger with a threat to him. The next morning at 8:59 a.m., my lawyer filed the motion. At 9:01, Mark called me, his voice boiling with fury. "You stupid man. You just signed your own warrant." "Check your car," I said quietly and hung up. I watched from the window. He stormed out of his house, saw Claire's handprint on his frost-covered window, and froze. The look on his face wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. He finally understood. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was in his system, and I had just turned his own weapon against him. The game had changed. The hunter was now the hunted, and the final move was mine to make. Fear is a language, and in that moment, staring at the handprint on his car, Mark Evans finally heard me speak it. He knew his control was now a contested signal, and I had the stronger frequency. He didn't call the police. Not that day. The filed motion to invalidate the consent form created a legal stalemate. My lawyer friend, David, argued that any agreement signed under the influence of an unlicensed, previously suspended therapist exploiting a known mental health condition was void. It was a nuclear option, exposing everything. But it froze Mark's ability to act. He couldn't push the criminal complaint without inviting scrutiny into his own conduct. We were in a Mexican standoff, but I was the one who just cocked the hammer. I used the stalemate as a bridge. Claire was the battlefield, and I had to secure the territory. The morning after the handprint incident, she was different. Quiet, pensive, drinking her coffee and staring out the window. The programmed placidity was cracking, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. "I had the strangest dream," she said, her voice soft. "I was at my car, the old one, the one that crashed, but Mark was there telling me it was safe to get in, and your voice was telling me not to, that he was lying." My heart leapt. The countersignal had breached the wall. It was in her conscious memory. "What did you do?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle. "I walked away," she said, looking at me, truly looking at me for the first time in months. "And then I woke up on the sidewalk, freezing. Daniel, what's happening to me?" It was the opening, the plea for help from the real Claire, not the programmed narrative. I took a deep breath. "Something was done to you, Claire, and I need to show you. But you have to promise me you'll see it through, no matter how hard it is to watch." She agreed. That afternoon, in my makeshift garage office, I showed her the curated footage, not the early paranoid clips where I suspected an affair. I started with the first clear video of her sleepwalking ritual, the cheese and frosting. She watched, hand over her mouth, tears welling. "I don't remember any of this," she whispered. Then I showed her Mark, the video of him in the hallway with the pendulum, speaking his trigger phrases. Her face went pale. He's in our house." "Watch his lips," I said. I played the enhanced audio. "The door is safe. The fuel is stored. The watcher is gone. Claire's breath hitched. Her eyes lost focus, a glazing over that was terrifyingly familiar. She was on the edge of a triggered state just from the recording. "Stop," she gasped, squeezing her eyes shut. That phrase, I hear it in my dreams. It's the thing that makes the fear quiet. "It's the key, Claire. He found it from your accident. The passerby who said help is watching. He twisted it. He made himself the watcher." I showed her the medical license suspension documents, the allegations. I showed her the consent form and the phone records proving she was driving when it was digitally signed. The constructed reality Mark had built around her began to crumble. She didn't break down. She got very, very still. And then, with a chilling clarity, she said, "He used my trauma to make me his puppet." That was the turning point. Claire wasn't just a victim, she was a witness, and she was furious. We formed a pact. We would take him down together, but we had to be smarter. We had to make it undeniable. Our weapon was Claire's own mind. With her conscious cooperation, we designed a sting. She would pretend the programming still held. She would go to Mark, express fear that I was becoming violent, that I'd discovered the therapy. She would ask for a session, a final conditioning to make her strong enough to leave me, and she would wear a wire. The meeting was set for his office after hours. I waited in a car down the street, listening through a receiver, my body coiled tight with dread. Claire's performance was flawless. She sounded scared, dependent, lost. "He knows, Mark. He has videos. He's going to hurt me," she sobbed. "I told you he was dangerous," Mark's voice purred, oozing false comfort. "But we've prepared for this. You're strong now. The pathways are set. Remember your cue." "The scent and your voice," Claire said. "Good. Tonight when he's asleep, you will take the emergency bag I gave you. You will come here, and we will enact the final protocol. The one that makes you forget your fear of him. That makes you see him as the threat he is. Permanently." My blood turned to ice. The final protocol. He was planning to use his conditioning to implant a command that would make Claire see me as an active danger. It could have made her violent. It could have made her call the police with a fabricated story of abuse. He was preparing to use her as a weapon against me. "Will it hurt?" Claire asked, playing her part. "The mind doesn't feel pain, Claire, only liberation. Now let's reinforce the anchor." On the audio, I heard the familiar click of his vial, the rustle of cloth, and then Mark's voice slipping into the rhythmic, hypnotic tone he used for conditioning. "The watcher is gone. The path is clear. The threat must be erased." Claire on the wire made a soft, assenting sound, but she also brilliantly asked a question. "And after the threat is erased, what happens to you, Mark? Where do you go?" There was a pause, a slight stumble in his confidence. "I'll be your guide always." "But the old watcher was a liar," Claire said, echoing my implanted phrase. "How do I know you're not?" The silence on the tape was electric. Then Mark's voice, tight with a sudden, controlled anger. "You're questioning the process. That's the paranoia he's infected you with. We need to deepen the session. Lie down." That was our cue. The moment he moved from manipulation to attempting a new, non-consensual procedure, I gave the signal. Claire's emergency phrase was, "I feel dizzy." The instant she said it, I called 911. I have a credible emergency at this address. A former psychiatrist with a suspended license is currently conducting an unauthorized, coercive medical procedure on my wife. We have audio evidence of imminent psychological harm. Then I called David, who was on standby with the local district attorney's office. I ran to the building. The police arrived just as I did. We entered together. The scene was exactly as the audio described. Claire was on a couch, Mark leaning over her with his vial. He looked up, shock turning to rage. The recording, the phone records, the medical board documents, Claire's tearful, coherent testimony given right there. It created an avalanche. Mark Evans was arrested that night. Not for a novel mind crime, but for tangible, prosecutable offenses. Practicing medicine without a license, fraud, coercion, and assault for the non-consensual administration of a substance, the scent trigger, with intent to harm. The legal process was long, but the evidence was devastating. He took a plea deal to avoid a public trial that would have dissected his methods. He was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in state prison, with a permanent injunction barring him from any therapeutic practice upon release. His name was added to a national registry. He was erased. But the real victory was quieter. For Claire and me, the aftermath was a different kind of trial. The damage was real. She underwent intensive, legitimate therapy for the trauma of both the accident and the psychological violation. The parasomnia didn't magically vanish, but with proper treatment, the episodes became less frequent, less complex. We learned to manage it together, with transparency, with alarms on the doors, with a safety plan. No more secrets. We sold the house. The memories in those walls were too tainted. We moved to a new city, a fresh start. The trust didn't come back overnight. How could it? I had spied on her. She had, under manipulation, conspired against me. We had to rebuild from the foundation, brick by painful brick. The final surprise, the one I never saw coming, came from a box of old things Claire was sorting. She found a journal from her early 20s, from the year after her accident. She'd never shown it to me. She brought it to me, her hands shaking. On one page, she had written about the crash, and she described the passerby, the one who said, "Help is watching." She had written a physical description, tall, thin, with a precise way of speaking. She'd written that he had stayed until the ambulance came, watching her with an intensity that scared her more than the wreck. The description fit a younger Mark Evans perfectly. It wasn't just that he'd learned about her trauma from her. He had been there. He had witnessed her vulnerability at its most raw moment, and 16 years later he had sought her out, waited for his moment, and used that intimate knowledge to try to own her. His obsession wasn't professional. It was personal, predatory, and years in the making. That revelation brought a horrible closure. The monster hadn't just entered our story. He had been there from the very first page. Today we're still healing. Some nights are hard, but we face them together, awake and aware. I never got my paranoid fantasy of catching an affair. Instead, I uncovered a horror story, and in fighting it, found a partnership more solid than the one I thought I had. The cameras showed me a nightmare, but in the end, they led us back to the truth. And sometimes the truth, no matter how ugly, is the only thing that can set you free. So what do you take from a story like this? That love is fragile. That trust is a thread easily cut, perhaps. But I learned something else. I learned that the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones we keep from each other, but the ones we keep from ourselves. Claire's mind had buried a horror to protect her, and that buried box became a weapon for someone else. My paranoia, my fear of a simple affair, blinded me to the far more complex and real danger already living in our home. We both failed to see what was right in front of us because we were looking for different monsters. This story isn't really about cameras. It's about attention. The cameras were just a tool, a desperate, illegal lens I used to focus on a shadow. But true attention, the kind that sees past suspicion, past the easy story, is what finally brought the truth to light. It's what allowed me to see the flicker of my real wife behind the programming. It's what allowed her to finally see the strings attached to her own mind. We live in an age of unprecedented surveillance. You can buy a camera smaller than a coin, hide it anywhere, and watch from anywhere in the world. The technology I used is available to anyone, but this story is a warning. Surveillance doesn't grant understanding. It grants data, cold, contextless, and easily misinterpreted. I had all the data points, the late nights, the weight gain, the secretive behavior. I assembled them into a story of betrayal because it was a story I understood. The truth was a story I couldn't have imagined. The real horror and the real lesson lies in the vulnerability of our own minds. We think of our thoughts, our memories, our very selves as fortresses, but trauma can create hidden doors. And there are people who spend their lives learning to pick those locks, not to help, but to possess. Mark Evans wasn't a supernatural villain. He was a craftsman of human weakness, using the tools of therapy as burglary tools. His sentence in prison is a closure, but it doesn't erase the chilling fact that his kind of predation is possible. It exists in the gray area between medicine and manipulation, between care and control. Claire and I were a case study in aftermath. There's no magical happily ever after that erases the scars. Some nights she still gets up. Some days I still feel a cold jolt of doubt before I remember we're on the same side now. Recovery isn't a destination, it's a direction. We chose to walk in it together, armed with the brutal, liberating power of the truth. We had to lose the idea of the perfect marriage to build a real one, forged in the fire of a shared nightmare. If this story stays with you, let it be a reminder. Look past the easy narrative, the strange behavior, the secretive phone, the late nights. They might point to an affair, or they might be the surface symptoms of a pain so deep the person suffering from it doesn't even know it's there. Sometimes the monster isn't in the shadows. Sometimes the monster is the shadow itself, cast by a light you haven't thought to turn on. The world is full of stories hiding in plain sight. This was ours. Thanks for listening to it. If you want to dive deeper into stories that explore the hidden fractures in our reality, consider subscribing. There's always more to the story.